Okay, so welcome to the Fusion360 2D drawing tutorial. This is going to be the first of a couple, hopefully. So since you kind of already oriented yourself with different areas of the Fusion360 software, we're going to go ahead and move forward to kind of talk about how do we get started modeling. And there's a couple different ways that Fusion360 is like a similar program you might have used called Tinkercad. Tinkercad is in the same families from Autodesk. Great program, usually used in kind of middle and elementary school. Also some tinkers who don't want to get into like full CAD mode. We can still do that in Fusion360 to make three-dimensional shapes. If you look under Create, there's actually some three-dimensional shapes that already come kind of pre-packaged, and you just basically tell the computer how big or small you want them to be. You're limited: box, cylinder, sphere. The torus is one of my favorite. It's like a donut. I hardly ever use these. I want more control over my modeling, and starting off with three-dimensional shapes, if you've ever used Tinkercad, it can be simple but also difficult. So I do like to start with two-dimensional shapes, and that means we're going to start with sketches. We're not going to use the Create or the Modify toolbar at all in this tutorial. So a couple things when you start Fusion360, under Sketch, and remember we have all these default settings at the top of the Sketch menu. Rarely do I use them. You can actually customize that if you want. If you notice, up here is this circle. Well, how to get there. It's set in the default, but you might not have sketch dimension as a default setting up there. If you go to one of the options, arc, 3-point arc, do you see this little arrow that pops up? This little weird arrow that when you highlight it with your mouse or hover over it, it says add to toolbar. If I click that, it's going to go ahead and put the 3-point arc up as one of those kind of shortcut icons. I don't mind clicking on a drop-down menu, so it's rare that I do that. And I don't really use one specific feature here often enough to warrant that. So I'm going to go ahead and get started making a two-dimensional sketch. The first thing you have to do is actually tell Fusion360 that you want to make a two-dimensional sketch. And the shortcut is right there, Create Sketch. And if you notice, it says creates a sketch on the selected plane or planar face. We'll get into what we mean by planar face a little bit later, hopefully. But if I just click down and do Create Sketch, if I left click with my mouse, I have to highlight actually where I want to put the drawing. Because remember, I live in a three-dimensional world, even though I'm making a two-dimensional drawing, and I can say where I want to start that sketch. And it's somewhat irrelevant unless you're like super specific with how you want to draw things. I usually just click the plane that's in front of me. If I luck out, it ends up being the front plane. But what I want you to notice is as I clicked front plane, it actually snapped the viewpoint, so I'm looking at the screen head on. I'm going to go ahead and do it again. I'm going to stop sketch. We'll talk about all this in a second. Right click, delete. Everything's gone. I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to purposely take my view cube and like get at a weird angle here. So when I click Create Sketch, left click, and I pick the plane I want to sketch on, if I left click, watch the orientation kind of snap to the front. In the introduction to kind of like the different areas of Fusion360, I highlighted the bottom kind of like play fast forward, and I'm hovering my cursor over there now. Something new has popped up. This icon called Sketch 2. And the reason it's 2 is I deleted the first one to show you how to do that again. This has popped up. We're going to see that it's going to record what we do in two different places. Right here, now I see it at the bottom. And then also under my browser, a new drop-down menu opened up called Sketches. And since I deleted Sketch 1, I only have Sketch 2. Notice the light bulbs are there. We'll kind of go back to that in a second. The third new thing that has popped up is the Sketch palette. There's a lot going on here. I've not used everything. I don't know why. I just haven't needed to yet. But there's a couple things. Rarely do I use the options. I'll show you one example later on. But I do use what we call constraints. Constraints are helpful to the program to kind of understand what you are drawing. It's also helpful for you because it kind of makes it easier to draw certain things. And I'll try to highlight that as I go. We're going to start with something as simple as a rectangle. That's a loaded statement right there, because something as simple as a rectangle, we're going to see there's like 15 different ways to make a rectangle in Fusion 360. I actually like having a lot of options, because when a problem comes around later on, I have a bunch of different ways to solve it, not just one that I have to remember or have to be good at. So I am under Create Sketch. I know because I have my view snapped. I have this Create Sketch icon both under this bottom kind of like tool area and over here to the top left under Browser. So I'm going to create a rectangle. Again, the default is a 2-point rectangle. I'm actually going to start with the rectangle I use the most often, and that's at the bottom, called a center rectangle. So again, I hovered my mouse over rectangle. The menu popped up to the right, and now I'm on center rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and left click on it. If you noticed, the cursor has changed. And there's some help that pops up in the form of like some words, place center point. And the icon next to the arrow is a rectangle. If I ever want to get out of this like drawing mode or anything where I've clicked and I am now like doing something through Fusion 360, if I just want to go back to my normal mouse, the escape button is your best friend. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, escape. And if you notice, the arrow goes back to just a normal arrow. I want to go ahead and click my center rectangle, and now the arrow has kind of changed. Then I have this cross and almost like sight that pops up, like when you're aiming. That's going to allow me to pick wherever I want to go ahead and make my rectangle. You're going to notice as you move, whenever you get near some like pre-planned points on Fusion 360, it'll actually like grab the cursor and place it there. It's trying to be smart and anticipate where you want to make your shapes. Why would you ever make a shape in the middle of like nowhere right here, right where my mouse is? Like you don't really know where that is. But if you want to kind of be logical about it and you have all these grid lines, you might want to place a corner of a rectangle in a certain area. Now in this case, I'm not making a corner rectangle. I'm not starting from a corner. I'm starting from the center. I love designing around the origin, so that's where I'm going to kind of hover my mouse. I'm going to click once. And if I don't move the mouse, nothing happens. But the words changed, and I'll say specify size of rectangle. I don't need to hold the mouse in. I just click once, but as I drag the mouse and move it in different directions, you're going to see that I have the option to make a rectangle. The cool thing about a center rectangle is it's symmetrical from left to right and top to bottom. I can make it wide or wider than tall. I can make it taller than wide. I can even make it a square, right, if I want to make them identical sides. So a couple different options we have. The first is to actually try to move my mouse and get a perfect rectangle, perfect in terms of the size. So let's say my goal was to make an 80 millimeter by 50 millimeter rectangle. I have lucked out. I have created the exact size. If you notice the area highlighted in blue, kind of towards the top of the rectangle says 80 millimeters. If it's highlighted in blue, one cool thing I can do is actually type in the dimension I want. So if I wanted it to be 75, I could type in 75. And if I hit tab, it'll actually move to the other dimension that's now highlighted in blue where it says 50. Well, if I wanted that to be 45, I could actually type that in. If I hit the enter button, it'll go ahead and lock in those dimensions. You can see that they have been highlighted, 75 and 45. And if that's the size rectangle I want, awesome. I have just made a 45 by 75 rectangle. A bunch of icons just popped up on the screen that you didn't necessarily intend, but they're important. They provide information to the computer and to you. So the first thing I want to show you are these parallel lines, right? It's telling you that those two lines are parallel, and by definition, the rectangle has to have parallel lines. It's also telling you that at this corner, there is a right angle, and that's our right angle sign. And then last but not least, this icon that I'm highlighting with the mouse tells you that that line is horizontal. Kind of all the things you need to define a rectangle. If I don't like the size of it, a couple things I can do. I can actually double click on the dimension, not on the line, on the dimension that represents how long that line is. And if I double click, again, the kind of box pops up with the size, and I can change that. Oh, I meant to make it 70. And that's helpful because I don't have to start from scratch. Up 45. I want that to actually be 50. I can go ahead and double click on that. There's another way I can make my rectangle 70 by 50. So I'm going to go ahead and hit escape, and that's going to kind of get me out of all of the drawing tools. I am going to start a new sketch. Sketch, create sketch. This time I'm going to pick a different plane. And I'm going to pick this plane. This is going to allow me to, hopefully, excuse me, I'm going to try to pick a plane here. Is it going to let me pick a plane? Oh, no, good. I don't mind that this is kind of live. It still thinks that I'm trying to draw a sketch, and I haven't told it that I want to stop drawing a sketch. So, very interesting. This happens to me often. I usually forget to stop the sketch because I'm so excited to start something else. So if my goal is, hey, this sketch is good, I want to move on, up here in the top of the little toolbar, something new popped up, Stop Sketch. When I click on Stop Sketch, it disappears. And now you can see those dimensions have gone away. Those little icons that tell you things are parallel or right angles have gone away. And now I have access to starting something new if I wanted to. What could be that new thing? I could make a new sketch. Kind of maybe I want to turn my rectangle into a triangle, and I'm going to cut some away. Maybe I'm going to add a circle to the top of it, and I'm starting to make a weird three-dimensional shape. I can do a new sketch. If I can create that sketch again by going under Sketch, Create Sketch, and I can pick the same plane if I want to and draw on it, or I can pick a different plane. I just picked a plane that was perpendicular to the plane I drew on. And since I only made a two-dimensional sketch, you can't see it because in theory it has, no dimensions to it. It has no depth. But if I turn my view cube by clicking on it, holding it in and turning, I can see that that sketch is still there. But if I want to draw on the right plane, it kind of looks like it disappears. So I'm going to head and I'm going to make a different rectangle this time. I'm going to make a rectangle that is a two-point rectangle. I rarely use the three-point rectangle. You can go ahead and mess with it, but I'm not going to go over it. The two-point rectangle is kind of just as it states. I see a very similar icon that pops up next to the mouse arrow. I'm going to go ahead and click the origin. And this time, instead of this rectangle being drawn from the middle out, I'm going to start at the corner. And as I move to the right, I can see a dimensional window pops up. I'm going to try to make the same shape cube, and I think we ended it with it being 50 millimeters. I'm going to type in 50. And my line got a little bit bigger. I'm now going to move my mouse up. By moving it up, I changed its width. But you can start to see now I'm having two dimensions. The bottom is changing as I move to the right, and the highlighted blue dimension is moving as I move up. I think ours was 75 high. And if I hit tab, it's going to move to the other dimension, and that was 50. Right? I'm going to hit enter, and I now have my 75 by 50. And you can kind of see that it looks similar. And if I move my view cube, I'm going to see that, my other rectangle is actually 75 wide by 50 tall. So what I can do is go back and click on those. I can make that 50 because I made a mistake. I can hit enter. And then I can go back and click on that, double click, and I can make that 75. And now I have a very similar rectangle on a different plane to the one I just made. This time using a two-point rectangle. If you notice, some similar icons pop up. I have vertical and horizontal. Those are constraints. If I move to the right and I look under the sketch palette, I can see that they're listed next to horizontal and vertical. Notice there is not a right angle. There's not a right angle because by definition, if a vertical line meets a horizontal line, it's going to create a right angle. So in this case, it's kind of implied, but it's not necessarily needed. All right, stop sketch. I'm very happy with that rectangle. I have a third plane, so I might as well draw a third rectangle just to show you how to do another version of it. So I'm going to create sketch. The plane I haven't picked is this one. I'm going to go ahead and highlight it. Both of my other rectangles disappear. They don't really. I just can't see them because they don't exist in three-dimensional space. But if I change my view, I can see them. I'm going to go ahead and go back and look at the top. This time I'm going to make a rectangle the way you would with a pencil, right? Nobody can really make a two-point rectangle with a pencil. That would be a really cool pencil. But I can do it with just lines. So I'm going to go ahead and under Create Sketch, I have the Line tool. Now, the last time I checked, a rectangle was made by connecting 4 lines. I'm going to go ahead and be kind of weird with it. 1, left click, 2, left click, 3, left click, and I go back to that point, and you can see when I get close to it, it like grabs on and tells me that I'm kind of snapped to that point. And if I hit a left click, whoop, awesome. Some things to notice, once you have closed this sketch, meaning all the lines are connected, you see that it changes color a little bit. I'm colorblind, so that looks green to me. If it looks green to you, awesome, I guess, right? That's important. If you don't see that color change, you can't turn that into a three-dimensional object. So that might happen. What you can do to double check, and what I can do, I'll go under Sketch. Here's a cool new tool called Trim. If I don't like one of those lines, I can actually, it turns red. It's like a cut feature, and I can get rid of that. So I'm going to go back to Line, and let's say I thought I got really close, but I didn't. If you notice, those two parts of the line are not connected. That means I have an open sketch, and if you notice, the shape did not change color. So I have a couple different ways I can change this. I can actually click on it and drag until they're touching. That's pretty cool, right? I have a constraint, over to the right called coincident. If I click on coincident, that's going to take this point when I click on it. If I touch this point, it's going to bring them hopefully together. So I have a couple different ways that I could join those. I could draw the line over again. I could drag the point to the other point, or I could use this coincident constraint. It's kind of up to you which way you want to do it. I don't have a rectangle, but I have some information. I know that this line, I don't know why, it's parallel to that line. That's kind of weird. But that doesn't help me at all. I know this line isn't parallel to this line. So again, by definition, I can kind of create my rectangle. I know that rectangles need to have perpendicular lines. So under constraints, I can click perpendicular. I can click one line and another line. And I can see that that changed the shape for it to be perpendicular. I can now click this line and this line. Oh, and that's perpendicular. Now, I'm not going to do the perpendicular here. I want to try a different constraint. I'll do horizontal and vertical. When I click horizontal and vertical, notice that there's a little icon next to the arrow. It changes. And if I click on that line, it's going to change it kind of based on where it's closest to. So is it closer to horizontal or is it closer to vertical? In this case, it's closer to vertical, so it should make that line a vertical line. Sometimes you can try to give the program too much information, right? Like now if I go and I do perpendicular, I see down at the bottom an error. The sketch geometry is over-constrained. There's no other possible angle other than a 90-degree angle here. So to tell it it's 90-degree angle, it's almost like you're overloading it with information. So we don't need that. Now what's different about my rectangle compared to the other two rectangles I have drawn? I did not do it anywhere near the origin. Let's see if I can make it go near the origin with my coincident constraint. If I want my origin to be coincident to that point. So that's what I did. I clicked on constraint. I clicked the origin and I clicked the corner and I moved the entire object so that those two parts are touching. So now I'm close to the origin. I'm not necessarily maybe where I want to be. But that's one way to kind of move your sketch. I also don't know if it's the right size. So here's where we're going to introduce a new tool called the Sketch Dimension tool. Under Sketch Dimension, when I click on it, again, I get this cool little icon. And this is how I'm going to measure. There's a couple ways I can do it. One, I can just click on the line. If I click once and drag out, click again, it's going to go ahead and give me that size. Oh, we're like super close. We wanted this to be 50 tall. I was 53.9. That was a pretty good guess. I can change that by typing in the number 50. And when I hit enter, it's going to go ahead and put that size up. That length now is 50 millimeters. I could, instead of clicking on the line, click the 2 points that make up the line. So I'll do that a different way to look at how long this top part of this rectangle is. So if I click once, left click, twice, left click, and then drag up, the same thing happens. The reason I'm kind of dragging it away from the sketch is if you put every dimension actually like on the lines that represent the rectangle, it just starts to get confusing. So I pull that dimension up away from the line, and it just kind of keeps things clean. I'm going to left click for the third time. And again, that blue little window pops up, and I now know I could type this in. This is a little bit longer than I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be 70. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 70 and hit enter. And that's another way to make a rectangle, this time with lines. And a couple different features in terms of how do I make measurements, how do I change measurements, and then how do I use some of these under the sketch palette, some of these tools called constraints. And that's how you make rectangles. Stop. And now I have 3 rectangles that are on all different planes that were made in different ways. So that hopefully helps you make some simple 2-dimensional sketches, and we will see you for the next tutorial. Thank you.